The federal courthouse in downtown Miami was unusually tense that Tuesday morning journalists filled every row of the galeraphones in one hand, notepads in the other, ready to capture what was expected to be a routine corruption trial. But there was nothing routine about the woman standing at the defense table, Pam Bondi, Florida's former attorney general, known for her poise under pressure, and even more so for the enemies she'd made. Taking on powerful institutions. At the other end of the room sat Judge Edward Chen, a man whose name sent shivers through junior attorneys. With 22 years on the bench and a reputation for cutting down anyone who challenged his authority, Chen ruled with the confidence of someone who believed he'd never be touched. At exactly 9 a.m. he entered the courtroom, his black robe trailing behind him like a cape, his thin mouth locked in a permanent scowl. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and just like that the show began. Bondi rose calmly, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her blonde hair pinned back with precision, not a single tremor in her voice as she introduced herself to the court. "Good morning, Your Honor. I am counsel for the defense." Chen didn't even look up from his papers. "I see," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I would have expected a more experienced attorney for a case of this complexity." Bondi didn't blink. "I assure the court," she replied evenly, "I'm fully prepared." But she knew this wasn't about legal merit, this was about humiliation, and Chen came ready to perform for the next 40 minutes. Bondi was peppered with interruptions, objections she hadn't made were denied, motions she filed were ignored. Every time she began to build an argument, Chen cut her off mid-sentence with a scoff or a snide remark, and the gallery reporters glanced at one another. Even the seasoned ones could feel it. This wasn't just tough judging, this was personal. Chen allowed the prosecution to ramble without objection, but when Bondi stood to respond, he'd lean forward and say things like, "Try to stay relevant, Miss Bondi," or "This courtroom isn't the place for campaign speeches." Still, Bondi stood tall, unshaken. She scribbled notes quietly on her yellow legal pad, note precise, each movement deliberate. And that's when people began to notice. She wasn't folding, she was recording, she was documenting every biased comment, every legal overstep, every break in courtroom decorum, not for drama, not for revenge, but because she had a plan. And Judge Chen, he didn't see it coming. At 11:45 a.m. the judge declared a lunch recess. With a smirk, he said, "Miss Bondi, I suggest you use this time wisely. Your client may want to consider a plea deal." The prosecution laughed audibly. Bondi simply gathered her papers and said, "Thank you, Your Honor. I look forward to continuing this afternoon." As she turned back to the defense table, a new folder that hadn't been there before was placed beside her. Its cover bore the seal of the Department of Justice. From the back row of the courtroom, a tall woman with a lanyard around her neck took her seat. No one noticed, not yet. But that's when everything began to shift. Pam Bondi wasn't just fighting for her client anymore, she was about to fight the system itself, and by the end of the day, one of the most powerful judges in the country would be in handcuffs. To be continued in part 2. She took every insult and turned it into evidence. The courtroom reconvened after a short break, but for Pam Bondi nothing had changed, at least not yet. Judge Chen returned with the same smug confidence, stacking the deck against her at every turn. "Miss Bondi," he said, flipping casually through her filings, "I've read your brief, and frankly I've seen better legal reasoning and student essays." A few in the gallery chuckled, but Bondi didn't flinch. She simply nodded and returned to her notes. Time after time she rose to speak, only to be cut off mid-sentence. She cited case law. Chen scoffed. She made objections. He waved them away. She submitted evidence. He questioned her motives. To the untrained eye it looked like a defeat, but Bondi was building a record. With each insult she wrote, with each interruption she documented. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately, as if she knew that every word she wrote would someday matter more than anything being said aloud. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, room began to shift. Jurors leaned forward, noticing the difference in how she was treated. Reporters stopped typing and started watching. Even members of the prosecution exchanged glances. Was this still a trial, or a trap being laid? Pam Bondi didn't argue back. She didn't raise her voice. She let Judge Chen speak for himself again and again and again, until the arrogance became unmistakable and the bias undeniable. She wasn't just enduring injustice, she was collecting it. And when she finally stood to speak again, she wouldn't need to defend herself. She'd let the truth do it for her. Coming up in part 3, the DOJ folder no one saw coming. The courtroom was buzzing when the lunch recess ended, but Judge Chen returned with even more confidence, fully expecting to crush whatever defense Pam Bondi had left. He didn't know he was walking straight into her trap. "Miss Bondi," he said, his voice loud and dismissive, "I hope you use the break to rethink your legal theory. I'd hate to see another misstep." Bondi stood calm, unshaken. "Your Honor," she replied, "before I continue, I'd like to address a few procedural matters." Chen sighed theatrically. "Unless it's something urgent, it is." Bondi interrupted. For the first time that day she reached into her folio and pulled out a thick manila folder, sealed, stamped, and unmistakably federal. She placed it on the evidence cart, and then without raising her voice said the words that flipped the courtroom on its head, "I am formally submitting into the record Surveillance data from an ongoing federal investigation, gasps echoed through the gallery. From the back row, a man in a dark suit stood up, his badge visible. Even from a distance, FBI Special Agent Marcus Rivera Bondi turned toward him with the same calm precision she'd held all morning. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to call our first witness. The silence was deafening. Chen blinked. Witness? Yes, she said. Special Agent Rivera is prepared to testify regarding communications between yourself and the primary corporate beneficiary in this trial. You could hear a pin drop. The judge didn't respond because for the first time all day he had nothing to say. Coming up in part, for the moment the judge turned pale. What you're about to hear isn't just courtroom drama, it's the moment truth punches through power on live record, because in just a few minutes Pam Bondi didn't just defend her client, she flipped the courtroom, she flipped the case, and she turned the judge's own words into evidence of his downfall. Don't blink now, this is where everything explodes. Special Agent Marcus Rivera took the stand in the gallery. Not a single journalist typed, not one juror moved, even the prosecution had gone completely silent. Pam Bondi stood at the center of it all, collected, precise and devastating. Agent Rivera, she began. Can you confirm the findings of FBI case file 23 JC 789 as it relates to Judge Edward Chen? Rivera nodded. For nearly a year, the FBI has been monitoring illicit financial activities involving several judicial figures. He said during this time we uncovered multiple wire transfers to an offshore account tied to Judge Chen. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Each transfer, Rivera continued, occurred within 48 hours of rulings that directly benefited Cream Industries. Bondi's tone remained calm, but her words landed like a hammer. And who is the CEO of Cream Industries? Maxwell Harrington. Rivera answered, the same individual. Judge Chen was recorded meeting with 7 times. Bondi stepped back, letting that settle. Then she moved to the display monitor. Your Honor, she said. With the court's permission, I'd like to enter into evidence Exhibit F, a series of email exchanges between Judge Chen and Mr. Harrington obtained via legal warrant. The screen lit up, email after email, subject lines like, timetable for favorable ruling, and let's ensure this sticks. Every message was time-stamped, verified and authenticated. Chen's face, normally composed and cutting, was now drained of color. Furthermore, Bondi added, we have 3 separate recordings in each. Judge Chen can be heard discussing trial outcomes before motions were even filed. Agent Rivera confirmed voice analysis has matched all recordings to Judge Chen with 98.9% certainty, and just like that the tide turned from a mock defense attorney to a courtroom warrior holding the system accountable. Even the prosecution team now looked stunned. One attorney leaned in to whisper, but couldn't take her eyes off the monitor, and Judge Chen, he stared at the screen, at his own words, his own betrayal, caught not by conspiracy, not by chaos, but by cold hard evidence. Pam Bondi closed her binder. This, she said softly, is not personal, Your Honor, it's documented, confirmed, and submitted under seal. Coming up in part 5, the courtroom gasped. Then the DOJ moved in. The room had barely begun to process what they'd seen when the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with authority. A woman entered, tall, sharpie, dressed in a charcoal gray suit with the seal of the Department of Justice stitched just above her pocket. She didn't speak right away. She didn't have to. Her badge read, Deputy Director Lauren Vasquez. She walked straight to the front, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice cool and deliberate. I am here on behalf of the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicked, even the jurors sat frozen, hands clenched on their laps. As of this moment, Vasquez continued, Judge Edward Chen is being detained pending formal charges of judicial bribery, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and racketeering under the RICO Act. The courtroom erupted, gasps, audible disbelief. One prosecutor dropped his pen. The defense co-counsel covered his mouth, and Judge Chen, he didn't speak, he didn't move, because the 2 marshals had already stepped forward, removing the gavel from his desk and pulling his arms behind his back. The click of the cuffs echoed louder than any gavel had that day, and in that moment the power shifted completely. Gone was the man who had mocked Pam Bondi. Gone was the arrogance, the sneer, the roguish shield persona. All that remained was a man exposed, silent, and suddenly very, very small. As he was escorted past the jury box, Chen's eyes locked with Bondi's. There were no words exchanged, but everything was said. He saw it now. This wasn't luck, this wasn't a political stunt, this was precision, planned, documented, delivered with discipline. Bondi stood still, unmoved, her expression professional, but to those who'd watched her that morning, whether the insults, take the jabs, and hold her fire, they knew this was the look of justice served without vengeance. Deputy Director Vasquez addressed the courtroom one final time. These proceedings are suspended. The defendant's case will be reassigned, and a full review of Judge Chen's previous rulings is now underway. She turned to the jury. You are dismissed with the thanks of the court. As the jurors exited, one elderly woman paused. She turned to Bondi, nodded once, and smiled. Coming up in part 6, the moment the media Storm-heightened Bondi walked into history outside the courthouse. The chaos had already begun. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Journalists stood shoulder to shoulder behind barricades, microphones, cameras, lights, all pointed at one door. And when it opened, it wasn't a senator, it wasn't a celebrity, it wasn't a viral activist with a slogan. It was Pam Bondi. No podium, no speechwriters, no press manager whispering sound bites into her ear. She walked down those stone steps alone, carrying nothing but her case file and the truth she'd just delivered in open court. Behind her, Judge Edward Chen was let out in handcuffs. The cameras caught the momentous, pale, stunned face in the afternoon sun, flanked by federal agents no longer untouchable, and the world saw what justice actually looks like. Not loud, not vengeful, but relentless. Bondi didn't stop for the cameras. She didn't hold up the file or claim victory. She simply nodded to the press and kept walking, because for her this was never about the spotlight. It was about restoring what the law was meant to be. Inside, court staff remained stunned. Prosecutors whispered among themselves, already dreading the reviews of cases they'd thought were untouchable. The DOJ agents began securing boxes of evidence. And in the jury room, one juror wiped tears from her eyes. She didn't raise her voice once, the woman said, but she made the most powerful man in the room answer to the law. That was Bondi's real win, not the suspension, not the headlines, not even the arrest. It was the moment. Silence carried weight, because every word she had spoken was backed by proof, purpose, and patience. No theatrics, no vengeance, justice. Pam Bondi didn't need applause. The truth had already spoken, and this time the system listened. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.